In a small-town motel, a woman is approached in the middle of the night. The way guests filter in and out of motels could mean an endless pool of suspects.
One strong possibility is that Alice knew her attacker well enough that she didn't suspect anything until it was too late.
Unfortunately for 59-year-old Alice Pepperl, not everyone is who they appear to be.
We started saying, well, Drifter's done something bad. Drifter did something wrong.
And a city's 30-year streak without a murder investigation is forced to an abrupt end. Oakley is a small city on the west side of Kansas, populated by just over 2,000 people. While Oakley is the county seat of Thomas County, it is situated between Thomas, Gove, and Logan counties. The city's claim to fame dates back to the Wild West. In 1864, William Cody and William Comstock compete in a legendary buffalo hunting contest just 10 miles west of Oakley. When the contest ends 69-46, William Cody earns a cash prize and the title of Buffalo Bill Cody. With a cultural center in his honor, the town of Oakley takes pride in that one of America's most famous cowboys claimed his name in the area. The city is founded 20 years after the contest in 1884, though it isn't until 1956 that the population begins to grow. It's at this time that the I-70 highway is constructed, opening new possibilities for those who choose to settle their lives here. For many travelers, the only interaction with the city might be through one of the motels. Alice Pepperl starts working at a local country club motel a few years ago, hired by the owner, Jeff Harsh. Known for being shy and quiet, she starts to open up more while working there and becomes dedicated to her job. Alice lives her entire life in the Logan County area. She's a mother of 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. But she divorced from their father years ago. The motel houses more than 20 rooms. Sitting on the business route of Highway K83 on the north end of Oakley, it's a perfect rest stop for weary travelers passing between the larger cities. Alice regularly works nights at the motel. Because of these late shifts, she has her own room down the hall from the main office. Alice's work ethic does not go unnoticed. She becomes the manager's right hand in managing the motel. In early December of 1988, Jeff books a ticket to leave town with his wife to attend a conference in Barbados, leaving Alice to hold the fort in Jeff's absence and ensure the motel runs smoothly. But Alice won't be alone in the motel, thanks to the housekeeping staff. She's friendly with her coworkers and often lends a helping hand. Also working in the motel is Dennis Perkins, a recent hire brought on to do some painting. And of course, there is always a few guests that filter in and out of the motel's rooms.
This is a typical roadside motel. It's not very big. It's about 20 rooms. These types of motels, particularly, when they're located right next to a highway, are really used by people passing through, and people cycle in and out on a regular basis. The problem is that you never really know who's staying at the hotel and for what purpose.
By the evening of December 6th, Jeff has left town for his conference. Alice is working her usual night shift, and as the night goes on, housekeeping staff leave for the night. Dennis finishes up his work for the day. He earns a daily wage of $15 that is paid out by Alice. He has a room in the motel but doesn't plan on spending his evening there. Instead, he's going out to a local bar to spend his earnings. Alice does her usual duties around the motel, including emptying the day's profits from the cash register.
As an overnight hotel worker, Alice actually lives at the motel. She takes care of the guests that are coming and going at all hours of the night. It's well known by all the employees that Alice keeps a special quarter in the cash register at all times for good luck. And this is a quarter that has a hole pierced through the middle, so it's very distinctive.
Very little is known about Alice's exact movements throughout the night. More than likely, she treats her evening as any other, helping guests, doing her usual duties. But what we do know is that at some point in the middle of the night, Alice passes through the hallway from the office to her room.
Well, it was late at night, so there wouldn't necessarily be a lot of people moving about the motel at this point, but there are in fact guests staying there, so she wouldn't really think anything of it.
Oakley, Kansas hasn't had a murder in 30 years. But that streak is coming to an end. Oakley is a small city in Kansas with a population of just over 2,000 people. It's a place full of history, most well known for its connection to the Wild West stories of Buffalo Bill. While relatively few people make their home in Oakley, its proximity to major highways keeps the city active. Alice Pepperl works at a local motel where people passing through frequently stay. Alice's boss leaves for a trip to Barbados, and she looks after the business in his absence. For overnight shifts, Alice even has her own room in the motel. Oakley is a peaceful city, going on 30 years without a murder within its 1.93 square miles. But that streak is coming to an end. In the morning of December 7th, one of the motel's housekeepers arrives at work. At approximately 10:15 a.m., she enters Alice's room. She discovers Alice's body on the floor next to the foot of her bed, naked and with a knife protruding from her abdomen. The housekeeper calls the local police, and the authorities arrive at the scene at about 11 a.m. The coroner assesses the body and is able to approximate the time of death to around 2 to 10 hours earlier. There's obvious signs of strangulation, small stab wounds in her chest, and a much larger wound from the knife still inside of her. But there needs to be a full autopsy before establishing which of her many injuries is the true cause of death.
Upon first viewing, there's still a weapon that is left within her body, and there's still evidence that is around her neck. So an autopsy will determine the exact cause and manner in which she died. An autopsy will reveal even defense wounds or things that have occurred within her body, and it is the only voice for the victim. So then we can understand what has occurred to this poor soul.
The police explore Alice's room in search of evidence, but the room itself contains almost no signs of any struggle taking place.
Well, every crime scene is different, and they can be massive or they can be very small and limited to a very contained area. You know, the absence of physical evidence can tell one story, just like a room being ripped apart with, blood stains and furniture tossed over can also tell a story. So what we're seeing here tells us that perhaps Alice knew the attacker and she didn't suspect anything was wrong until it was too late.
But does the state of Alice's room point to her having been close to her attacker? Or would she be so trusting with one of the motel's guests? The only thing out of place in Alice's room is that her curtains have been ripped down. This could be a sign that at some point Alice tries to get away, or even fight back. But without any other damage to the room, it appears her efforts aren't enough. Alice's nightgown is found next to her on the floor. On closer inspection, the investigators discover it's stained with blood. Whether the blood belongs to Alice or her attacker, they'll have to bring it in for testing to find out.
Investigators locate Alice's nightgown. It was on the floor, and they do, upon closer examination, find a small bit of blood on it. But they're not sure at this point if it's Alice's blood or potentially the attacker's blood. At this point, police need to take the nightgown into evidence, and they need to have it examined so that they can narrow down a list of suspects based on a comparison to the blood that's found on the nightgown.
In search of a motive, the police search the rest of the motel for signs of anything missing. When they look through the motel's office, nothing appears to be out of place. The cash register is found locked. After getting inside, they discover there's only 47 cents left inside the drawer. Without knowing how much money there should have been, the police can't yet determine if anything is stolen. But Alice's lucky quarter appears to be missing. Alice's body is sent to a forensic specialist in Wichita for an autopsy. It wasn't immediately clear on the crime scene which of Alice's many injuries killed her. Forensics will need to investigate the coat hanger, the extension cord wrapped around her neck, as well as the knife wound in her abdomen.
So the forensic specialist that performs the autopsy on Alice makes a determination of death to be asphyxia by the extension cord that was wrapped around her neck. So that indicates that there was no airway left and she was unable to breathe. She also sustained injuries that were consistent with stab wounds to the chest, and there was also a 7.5 centimeter knife that was left on the victim. So that knife, after autopsy, showed that it hit an artery, but she had already been deceased, so therefore an arterial bleed did not occur. Otherwise, if the victim had been alive, she could have bled to death. So it also indicates in the autopsy that she was a victim of a sexual assault after she had been deceased.
As the investigation sheds more light onto what happened to Alice, it continues to beg the question as to who could be responsible. Signs point to her not suspecting them until it was too late. Can the police track down the killer before the trail goes cold? The investigators search for answers by trying to gather information on the motel itself.
When starting an investigation, the investigator has to be open to all possibilities, and it's often said you don't know what you don't know. So gathering information is key to finding information and evidence that points you in the right direction. So anybody that may have known Alice in any context whatsoever would be important to talk to. So there are guests at the hotel, there are other employees, there are owners, there are people in Alice's life. All of these people who police would speak to at this point aren't suspects. They're just for the purpose of gathering information to hopefully take the investigation in one direction or another.
The police soon begin trying to make contact with the motel's owner, Jeff Harsh. They're finally able to reach him in Barbados to get some background information on the motel, its employees, and guests. The conversation turns to Dennis, who's been painting the motel rooms, but no one's seen him since the night of the murder. Jeff explains Dennis started working at the motel last week. He's a hitchhiker Jeff discovers after a call from another local business owner. Jeff is known around town for helping people when they're down on their luck, offering them work at the motel for $15 a day, as well as a place to stay. Jeff isn't sure he wants to hire someone while he has plans to go out of town. Alice convinces him otherwise. There is work she wants done around the motel and would love to have Dennis do some painting. Eventually, Alice is able to talk Jeff into agreeing. There's also the question of possible theft, and talking to Jeff means the investigators are able to find an answer to another question. Jeff confirms that there is always at least $100 kept in the cash register. With new information at hand, the investigators believe that whoever murdered Alice more than likely also stole the missing $100. This would mean the killer is probably in possession of Alice's lucky quarter.
Well, because investigators found the cash register closed with money missing from inside, there are two possible things that they think may have happened. Either the suspect knew how to open the cash register, or it was already open and they closed it, possibly in an attempt to hide that anything was taken.
Dennis is considered the best lead in the case. Investigators put out an alert with his description, hoping to find him nearby.
Well, time is very important, obviously, and the longer these things go without having somebody as a suspect, the more difficult it is to solve the case. So putting out an alert for their first potential suspect is an attempt by the detectives to, get as much information as quickly as possible.
The investigators get their first tip when a convenience store clerk calls in believing they've seen Dennis. Not only that, but they claim that Dennis paid with a quarter that had a hole in it. Could it be the same quarter that Alice kept in the motel's cash register for good luck? The quarter's luck may have run out before Dennis got his hands on it, because the convenience store isn't the only place where he's been spotted. Alice Pepperl is found dead in her motel room in the small town of Oakley, Kansas. While the room itself reveals very little about what led to Alice's murder, a missing quarter from the motel's cash register may be the clue that leads the investigation toward its culprit. And with Dennis Perkins, the motel's new hire, going missing after Alice's death, he looks to be the prime suspect. Dennis is reportedly seen paying with what could be Alice's lucky quarter, adding yet more weight to the suspicion that's been placed on him. When the investigators put out an alert for Dennis, it so happens that an off-duty bartender from Scott City is listening in via their police scanner.
I just happened to be listening to it before I went to work that day. We heard him put out a bolo to be on the lookout for this guy, and they gave his description and what he was wearing. They said exactly what he had done. He had murdered a woman in Oakley, and I didn't think any more about it and went into work.
Kelly's shift starts like any other, but about an hour in, everything changes.
He's quiet, he's polite, and I don't recognize him. I know he's out of place. The clothes, the description fits.
Well, one of the benefits of being such a small town is that everyone knows everyone, and strangers stick out just because they're strangers. So when a strange person who is being sought by the police may be around, it certainly makes people aware. And police obviously caught a break in this particular case.
He gets his beer, and I call my mom. And I asked her, I said, did they by chance give anything else about what we were listening to earlier? And she said, yes. And she said, he has a green backpack. Well, I knew at that time that was him because he had a green backpack. And I kind of hesitated, and she says, is he there? And I says, yeah, I think so. She says, I'm calling the police. And that's when we hung up. And I'm trying to talk quietly because he can hear everything.
Investigators dispatch immediately after receiving the tip on Dennis's location. Oakley and Scott City are approximately an hour apart. It's a relatively short distance, but in times like this, every extra second adds to the potential of a suspect getting away. While the investigation still belongs to Oakley, the Scott City police are called in to make the arrest.
You know, just trying to watch him out of the corner of my eye, so see if he, goes out the back door. I don't want him to leave. It scared me, if he was the one that did it in Oakley, he wouldn't, put it past him to do it elsewhere. So yeah, just kind of glance around the bar to make sure everything was still okay. But yeah, I tried to shield my voice from him because it was dead silent in there.
It's fairly remarkable to have a situation where, an everyday person just going about their business suddenly is in the middle of a police manhunt, essentially. So when somebody sees this suspect and they have to calmly notify the police somehow and hope that the police get there before the suspect leaves, that's a pretty intense moment. And I can imagine there's a lot of anxiety associated with being in that situation.
When the police arrive at the bar, Dennis is found sitting at a table, still drinking a beer.
Next thing I know, about 10 minutes later, the police chief and another officer came in, and I kind of pointed where he was sitting, and they walked back there, and I could hear him ask him who he was, and they wanted him to come with them.
He is arrested on the spot, and just over $77 is discovered on his person.
Dennis is found sitting at the bar, and police find $77.60 on his person. So it's certainly suspicious. It's not an unusually large amount of money for someone to have on them. There is the sight of Alice's quarter, which is a little bit more suspicious. However, it's certainly not conclusive. It could be a coincidence. Also, even if Dennis stole the money from the cash register, it doesn't necessarily tie him to Alice's death.
Testing confirms that the blood found on Alice's nightgown does not match her own. With the suspect in custody, the forensic team is able to run the blood against Dennis's, and they discover that the blood type is a match. Could this evidence mean that Dennis approached Alice that night? Why would he attack her? Was Alice's murder planned or accidental? Before the investigators arrive in Scott City, local police officer Greg Davis is asked to read Dennis his Miranda rights.
I was coming on duty for second shift, and I went down to the station, and the chief told me that they had a possible homicide suspect in custody. He told me to go back in, they have a holding room, which is where you do interviews, booking procedures and such, and he was back in there, and the chief told me that he wanted him Mirandized, and just basically keep him talking, don't get into the facts of the case, because the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, Oakley Police, and Gove County Sheriff's Department were supposed to be en route down there.
When asked to sign a waiver confirming he understands these rights and that he's willing to waive them, he says he can't do it. He tells them that he's unable to read or write. To aid Dennis, each statement of his rights are explained verbally until he confirms he understands. Finally, he is asked if he would like to waive his rights in order to talk, to which he answers yes.
I want to make sure there's no doubt in his mind that he's been Mirandized, that he doesn't have to talk. That's extremely important to me. I want him to know and understand that his rights were important.
Miranda rights advise someone under arrest that they have the right to silence and also that they have the right to a lawyer. This is extremely important that it's done multiple times, because if there's any evidence that it was not done properly, that means that anything an accused person says to the police could be deemed inadmissible in court.
Basically started establishing rapport with him and talking to him. Told me he was a handyman that had gotten hired there to help out. And at that point in time, he started saying, well, Drifter's done something bad.
Dennis confesses, but his confession only leads to more questions.
And I said, who's Drifter? And he would say, well, that's my evil twin.
Alice Pepperl is found in her motel room, murdered. The cause of death? Asphyxiation. Very little evidence is found at the scene of the crime, but they do find a small amount of blood that is not a match for Alice. Approximately $100 goes missing on the same night as the murder. Along with this money is a special quarter with a hole in it that was kept for good luck. After putting out an alert with Dennis's description, the police receive a tip that he is seen drinking at a bar in Scott City. When it comes out that Dennis cannot read or write, his rights are read out loud, and he verbally confirms that he waives them. Afterward, Dennis brings up the Drifter, who he claims is his evil twin. Almost immediately after being questioned about the Drifter, Dennis's whole demeanor changes.
Then he dropped his head down and he sat up in the chair and looked me right dead in the face and said, "You're talking to Drifter." He made good eye contact with me and he stuck his chest out. And the more I asked him about Drifter, the more it became apparent he was talking about a personality, another personality that he claimed he had. And he would say, well, that's my evil twin. And he started telling me what he did as Drifter. He kept leaning towards it. He had done something to a lady at a motel, and he'd strangled her.
Dennis admits to having been involved in killing Alice, but does not take responsibility. Dennis claims that it was the work of his split personality. who he refers to as the Drifter.
I didn't know what to do at this point in time. I mean, I'm told, don't get into the facts of the case. I just wanted to keep him talking. I did not want a confession out of this guy, and he led me there by dropping his head and sitting up and saying, "You're talking to Drifter, dude." And then he started telling me stuff. At that point in time, what am I gonna do? Say, shut up? No. If he's giving me information, he's been Mirandized, let him talk.
As the conversation goes on, Dennis changes back and forth between his usual demeanor and the personality he refers to as the Drifter.
Dennis was very meek and unassuming, and drop his head and sit up and say, "Well, I don't know what Drifter did, but it was bad." After we talked a little bit, and he would drop his head again and sit back up and look at me and say, "You're talking to Drifter." He always said, "You're talking to Drifter, dude," like he was trying to intimidate me or something.
As the confession goes on, it gets deeper into not only the details of the act, but into his history as well. Dennis admits that this was not the first time he raped a dead body. He previously worked for undertakers in Pennsylvania and claims that it was during this job that he first committed such an act.
And then after she was dead, he proceeded to sexually assault her. And he referred to that as moon over paradise. But he'd torn some of her clothing off, and that's when, voila, moon over paradise. It was strange. I've never heard that referred that way before. So I continue listening to him. I'm not trying to interrogate him or get information from him, I'm just listening. He's explaining to me what he did.
When the Oakley investigators arrive, they take over for Greg, but then Dennis shuts down.
The Kansas Bureau of Investigation, Oakley Police, and Gove County Sheriff's Office showed up. I went out and discussed the case with them and discussed what had happened, that he'd been Mirandized. I was just trying to keep him talking. So they went in there to talk to him. And when they went in there, he clammed up. He wouldn't say anything to them. So they came back out and asked me to go in there. And I sat down and talked to him. I introduced him to each of the officers that were there and told him that he needed to talk to them. They were associates of mine.
Dennis also reveals that he has spent time in a mental institution in California, a fact that could corroborate his claim of having this second personality. The trial of Dennis Perkins begins in October of 1989. Dennis goes forward with an insanity defense, citing his split personality being to blame for his actions.
By pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, Dennis is essentially admitting that he committed the actions that make up the offense, but he's saying that because of his mental disorder, he's not culpable and therefore is not guilty of the moral element of the crime. So normally by pleading not guilty by reason of mental disorder, if that defense is accepted, someone would be committed to spend some time at a mental institution instead of in a regular prison.
Partway through the trial, something changes in Dennis. He has a sudden outburst, screaming to everyone in the room. Dennis yells that he did not murder Alice, that she was nice to him and he would never hurt her. He believes he is being persecuted just for being a hitchhiker. Finally, he says he saw the real killer. He knows who did it. Dennis is removed from the courtroom and refuses to return. Is it possible that Dennis lied in his confession, or was somehow coerced? Could Dennis have witnessed another man killing Alice? The trial of Dennis Perkins for the alleged murder of Alice Pepperl continues without Dennis's presence, as he refuses to return to the courtroom. The court reaches a guilty verdict, convicting Dennis of first-degree murder, aggravated robbery, and rape. He is sentenced to life for the first charge and 15 years for each of the latter charges.
You know, for investigators, this type of case is something you'd consider rather unique. There's really no apparent motive for this particular case, so it stands out as being somewhat strange.
Dennis sees a psychiatrist regularly, and over the next 2 years makes 6 appeals to his sentence. His claims range from coercion to the lack of competency to stand trial, to improper definitions given to the crimes he was convicted of.
So a key part of Dennis's appeal is competency. So competency basically means whether or not someone's fit to stand trial. And so what that focuses on is whether they have the capacity to understand what's happening to them in the system, if they have the ability to instruct counsel. So if they understand the role of their lawyer, the role of the prosecutor, and the role of a judge. So Dennis is arguing that at the time of his trial, he did not have that competency.
Personally, I did not believe that he had multiple personalities. I felt he was using it to excuse his behavior or to hide what he'd done and justify it. And the way he would flip it on and flip it off is another thing. I felt he was using the system. He'd learned how to use the system.
Dennis is examined by multiple psychiatrists. In the end, it is determined that he is in fact fit to stand trial. All 6 of his appeals are ultimately rejected, and his convictions stand. Dennis spends the rest of his life in prison, where he dies on August 3rd, 2018.
Dennis Perkins, what he did, will always stick with me the rest of my life.
Though Dennis is found guilty for his crimes and punished for all that he has done, it doesn't change the fact that Alice's presence in Oakley continues to be missed. She is mourned by her family and her friends, and the countless lives that she touched.
I was happy that I could be instrumental in catching this guy. I was just glad I could help the family.
A lot of people, both in Scott City and Oakley, had the old belief you could leave your front door unlocked. And I think that changed that. You know, here's some guy that drifts off the highway, and he lands up killing this woman and raping her. That has a definite ripple effect in the community.
Oakley, Kansas is a city most known for its connection to the past, for hunting buffalo in the Wild West or finding ancient fossils. But in the end, it's not the past, but the people who live here that make Oakley what it is.